These are 8 ways that male authors get female characters completely wrong, and also some practical things that you can do to solve these problems. Now men, you should watch this so you don't get posterized on Reddit for writing women terribly. And then women, you probably want to watch this just to see whether you agree with me or not, but I do think there is, say, 1 or 2 problems that you might fall into as well. So we're gonna go over 8 common mistakes, and the very last 2 are probably the most important ones. Let's start with number 1. Making women incapable. So Reese Witherspoon runs one of the biggest book clubs in the world, Reese's Book Club, and she argues that one of her least favorite lines of dialogue from female characters is, "What do we do now?" What this does is it makes your female characters very passive. Now, is it the biggest problem in the world if this happens once? Well, I mean, no, but what if most of your female characters do it? Or what if it happens across multiple books? Now, a good test to see whether you're making this mistake in your fiction is trying the Toriel test, which is from Lord of the Rings, specifically from The Hobbit. And this test simply asks, do you have a female character who is good at her job? Evangeline Lilly plays the woodland elf Toriel in the movies, and she is leader of the Mirkwood Guards, and she is a very, very, very capable fighter. Now, obviously this isn't canonical Tolkien, it wasn't in the books, but they added it for the movie because they needed a strong feminine character. But I think this test is very useful because if you don't have at least a single female character who's good at her job, you're probably tending towards making your female characters incapable. A second mistake a lot of male writers make about women is just a basic ignorance of the physical. So on social media, I saw someone complaining about a book they'd recently read. And in it, a female character is washing someone else's blood out of their own clothing. And the omniscient narrator says, oh, she had never washed blood out of her clothing before. I'm guessing that author has never lived with a woman before, or is maybe even aware that women have periods. I find that male authors are often ignorant about makeup as well. The mascara never smears, the lipstick never comes off, and they never take time to actually apply makeup. In the book Silence of the Lambs, when Clarice is preparing to meet Dr. Lecter, she worries that she looks too young. So what that means is obviously she would be wearing makeup in an attempt to appear older, right? But she says right before she meets him, she goes in the bathroom, this is in the books by the way, and splashes a whole bunch of water on her face, which she wouldn't do if she had put on a lot of makeup. And the third thing is just general ignorance about the body. There's this Australian writer named Michael Robotham, and he wrote a book called When You Are Mine. And here is a quote that you will not believe from that book. I found myself wondering whether my ovaries had made a decision for me. They sometimes jiggle when I'm around a man I fancy. Honestly, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. I guess I'm going to laugh, but woo. Ovaries do not become aroused by the opposite sex. Like that's just not a thing. Okay, for the next mistake, let's consider number 3, attractiveness as the sole measure. So there can be a tendency in a lot of books, both written by men and written by women, to associate beauty with goodness. And what this looks like is the main character, the hero, is always extremely good looking, while the villain is always ugly and a hag. I'm just gonna go out on a limb here and say that beauty is not associated with moral goodness. There's no correlation. So just an example of this, so you know I'm not making it up, is in Rick Riordan's The Lightning Thief. He often describes the antagonists as being ugly and fat, like the minor antagonist Clarice, who is unattractive and overweight. And on the other hand, his female heroines are always exceptionally beautiful, like Annabeth Chase. And I do think that sometimes female authors can make this mistake as well when they write tropes like the smart but ugly sister versus the beautiful but dumb sister. Or sometimes a sneaky way to prioritize beauty above all else is when you describe a certain character as being past their prime, like, oh, this character used to be beautiful 10 or 20 years ago. I don't think that's a good way to describe someone. What you're really saying is the most important part about this female character is their sex appeal, and guess what? They don't have it anymore. However, if I'm wrong about this, you can roast me in the comments. I am fine with having a debate on this. Let's go. And in general, I'd say that film and TV has exacerbated this problem. Most shows, everyone is just absolutely gorgeous, which is why it's really refreshing when you see a character who looks just normal. In the show The Perfect Couple, starring Nicole Kidman, there is a detective in that show. She is played by Donna Lim Champlin, and she is just very normal looking. She's decidedly not pretty. She definitely wasn't cast for her looks, but she looks like the type of actress who would actually be a small town detective. And guess what? She is an absolutely fantastic actress, probably my favorite character in the whole show. And it's just refreshing to see a female lead that isn't dependent upon her beauty to carry her. The next mistake is crucial to avoid. Number 4, lack of story involvement. So here's a question for you. Do your female characters affect the plot? Or are they just serving sort of as prop pieces for your male characters? Now, a great test to determine this is the Mako-Mori test, which comes from the movie Pacific Rim. And it simply asks, do you have a female character who has an independent story arc that doesn't just support the male story arcs? Now, Mako-Mori inside the movie actually is a great example of this. She survives an attack as a child, but then loses her parents, seeks revenge, and wants validation from her adopted father, Pentecost. She is definitely not a sidekick character. She is a standalone character in her own right. Now, if you want a book that fails the Mako story test, I'll give you an example. The 23 books of The Adventures of Tintin, or if you're French, Tonton, written by Hergé. So in this book, female characters are almost non-existent. If they appear, it's like very much in the background, not as major characters at all. Now, maybe your book does feature female characters in a much more prominent role than Tintin does. But you also have to watch out for ideas like the damsel in distress, which is where you have a female character who occupies a very central role, but they're only existing to give the male character something to do, to support the male character's arc. Now, I'll say one more thing about this. Everything I've said so far in this video has been about female protagonists, main characters who are women. It's just as important to make sure the background characters, like the extras in your novel, also are sometimes female, right? Females are 50% of the population, so don't make all the background characters just a default of men. Now it is time for the 5th mistake, which is a lack of psychology. If in your book you have a female walking alone at night and you never have once come into her head that she might be scared for her safety, you're not really tapping into what a woman would think in that circumstance. Another example, if you have your female lead travel to a country like Egypt by themselves and not think of their own physical safety, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. When I traveled through Egypt, I was with a woman, and the number of catcalls that she got walking down the street with me right next to her, was astonishing. So, you just have to be aware of these things as a guy. This is the female experience in the world. The second thing you have to pay attention to is the social. Sometimes men will write women, and the women won't have any close female friends at all. They'll be very socially isolated. It just doesn't take into account like how women exist in the world. This is what the Bechdel test was actually created to measure, because you have to have 2 female characters who are both named and they're talking to each other about something other than a guy. And the third thing I want to say about psychology is make sure you get tricky stuff like infertility right. To write a woman who is struggling with infertility, you have to work on really getting their psychology right. How hurtful it is to struggle with something like that. How they feel socially. How it affects how they relate to their partner. How it affects how they think about themselves as a woman. And plus, you just have to know like medical procedures like the turkey baster method and exactly how many needles and shots it takes to go through a process like IVF. It's a lot. It is a lot. As someone who did this with my wife, trust me, it is a lot of needles, way more needles than you would think. A 6th mistake that some writers make when writing about female characters is no agency. Does the female character in your story make decisions that are independent of men? I'm talking about choices, real choices. So here's an exercise for you. I want you to choose one of your female characters and list every decision that they make in your book. But these decisions, they have to affect the plot in some way. They have to be decisions of consequence. And also, romantic decisions about men don't count. I'm looking for other types of decisions. Now, a test to see whether you're doing well in this category is the sexy leg lamp test. This got its name from the sexy leg lamp in The Christmas Story, and it basically asks, can your female character be replaced with a sexy leg lamp, and it won't make a difference in your story at all. Applying a test like that to your fiction, make sure you don't have like a strong female character that's maybe action-oriented or just physically strong or something, but they don't make any decisions that actually affect the plot. A 7th mistake that I feel is very common is stereotyping women. I feel like there are 2 ways that you could possibly stereotype your female characters. One would be just have a character with all female traits, like very feminine traits. Baking, interior decorating, yoga, gardening. It might be a good idea to throw in at least one trait which isn't stereotypically feminine, so they feel like a real human being rather than a caricature. Yet on the opposite side of the spectrum, I do think there's a problem with having a female character with zero feminine traits at all. This is usually called the man with boobs type of writing because the author couldn't trouble themselves to actually learn how to write an authentic female character. This is why I really dislike the writing advice to write a man and then just swap them into a woman, because you're not really taking the time to step into the truth of who your character really is. And one last thing to look out for when you're in danger of stereotyping female characters is authorial insertion. And this is when it's painfully obvious that a male author is trying to say, hey, this is a real woman I've created on the page. See, she's examining her boobs in a mirror, or she just got her period. And usually this happens on like page 2, and it's just so transparent. I'm like, okay, I see you trying. I see you trying on the page now. I see you, the author, rather than the character. Now we are down to our very final mistake when writing women, and I think it's probably the one that a lot of you were expecting when you came to this video. It's number 8, cliched female description. So I'm gonna highlight 3 mistakes when describing female characters. One is reducing your female characters to body parts. And this is particularly problematic when it's the body parts that men might notice first. Hips, boobs, waist, hair. Let's look at a satirical example of how you should never write a female character. Cassandra woke to the rays of sun streaming through the slats, cascading on her naked chest. She stretched, her breasts lifting with her arms as she greeted the sun. She breasted boobily to the stairs and titted downstairs. I mean, that's a satire, but I think there's a grain of truth in that, is that some men write women focusing far too much on their chest. Don't be like that, please. Please don't be like that. A second common mistake when describing women is to focus on the numbers. Sometimes I'll see female characters introduced and they'll be like, she was 5'7", 113 pounds. C-cup breasts. 1, the dimensions are highly improbable. And then 2, it's like introducing a male character by focusing on bicep girth and genital girth. It's just tacky and weird. Now, if you're introducing a Jack Reacher sort of character, not Tom Cruise Jack Reacher, but Alan Ritchson Jack Reacher, then yeah, of course you can focus on something like size. But when you list women's measurements, it's like you're putting them up for sale on Craigslist or something, and it's just very cringy and very tacky. And then lastly, when describing women, I would beware of some overused adjectives. Stuff like dainty, petite, slender, or curvy, busty, hourglass. I think I might get some pushback on this in the comments, but let's be clear, I'm not trying to ban these words. I'm not saying never ever use these words. I'm saying if you find yourself using words like this semi-frequently, then I think you have to check yourself and be like, is this a cliched, male-centric vision of a woman? Is there a better way that I can describe her other than focusing on what is sexually attractive about her? I hope that was helpful, and my next video is going to be on mistakes you should avoid when writing men, so make sure to check that out.